A former Nigerian governor allegedly collected 579 million naira in severance pay when his legal entitlement was just 40 million naira. That's not a rounding error. That's not an accounting mistake. That's a gap of over 539 million naira, nearly 14 times what he was legally owed. And yet, as of today, April 1st, 2026, this man doesn't even have bail. While everyone is talking about whether El-Rufai will be freed on April 14th, nobody is asking the more important question. Why did it take Nigeria over 3 years after he left office to get him into a courtroom in the first place? And who exactly is the real target here, the man or the message? Stay with me, because what's happening in Kaduna right now goes way deeper than one former governor and a corruption charge. Before we go deeper, if you're just finding Naijanewsfeed, welcome. This channel exists to break down what's really happening in Nigerian politics without the noise, without the spin. Hit subscribe and stay with me, because this one gets very interesting. Alright, let's set the scene properly. On February 18, 2026, operatives of the ICPC, the Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences Commission, arrested former Kaduna State Governor Nasir Ahmed El-Rufai. He had just finished presenting himself to the EFCC, the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, a few days earlier on February 16th, over financial irregularities from his time in office. He was briefly granted bail after 2 nights in EFCC custody. Then the ICPC came for him, and this time there was no quick bail. He spent 34 days in ICPC custody before he was formally arraigned. That's over a month behind bars before even seeing a charge sheet in open court. The arraignment finally happened on March 24, 2026, before a federal high court in Kaduna. The charges are marked FHC/KD/73/2026. 10 counts in the federal court alone, covering money laundering and financial misconduct. But it doesn't stop there. A separate case was also filed before the Kaduna State High Court, a different court, different co-defendants, different charges. We're talking abuse of office, fraud, and conferring undue advantage. Now, here's the twist that made everyone pay attention last week. El-Rufai's mother passed away. The ICPC, controversially, released him on what they called compassionate grounds to attend the burial. Critics screamed. There was a subsisting remand order from the court. You can't just wave a man out of custody while a judge has ordered him remanded. That was legally messy and politically explosive. He came back to court on March 31st, and on April 1st, today, after hearing arguments from both the defense and prosecution on his bail application, Federal High Court Justice Rilwan Aikawa adjourned for ruling. The decision on whether El-Rufai walks out of ICPC detention or stays locked up will be delivered on April 14, 2026. After the court session today, DSS operatives, Department of State Services, Nigeria's secret police, whisked him away. Not ICPC this time, DSS, reportedly heading to Abuja. And that detail matters, as we'll get to shortly. Now, let's talk about the architecture of this case, because understanding which institutions are involved here tells you a lot about the level of seriousness and the level of politics behind all of this. You have 3 agencies playing different roles here. First, the EFCC, the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. They picked him up first in February, briefly. The EFCC typically handles financial crimes with an economic dimension, fraud, money laundering. They released him. Then the ICPC took over. Second, the ICPC, Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences Commission. This is the agency that filed the charges, arrested him, held him in custody, and is prosecuting him. The ICPC's mandate is specifically about public sector corruption, abuse of office, misappropriation of government funds, official misconduct. Their charges in the Federal High Court cover 10 counts. Third, and this is where it gets interesting today, the DSS, the Department of State Services, Nigeria's secret police, is Nigeria's domestic intelligence and security agency. They operate under the presidency. They are not a prosecuting agency. They don't file charges. So why are DSS operatives the ones carting a man away from a court proceeding? This is a question that deserves an answer. His own lawyers confirmed that his separate DSS-related case is scheduled for April 10th at the Federal High Court in Abuja. So there's a third legal battle coming, and that one involves the secret police directly. Now, what does Nigerian law say about all of this? The Nigerian Constitution under Section 36 guarantees the right to a fair hearing. Section 35 covers the right to personal liberty. Bail, as El-Rufai's counsel argued in court today, is a constitutional right, not a privilege. However, the prosecution has the right to oppose bail on grounds of public interest, specifically the risk of the accused tampering with witnesses or obstructing investigations. The remand controversy around his mother's burial is worth flagging. A court remand order is an instruction from the court to detain an accused person. For the ICPC to release him without a court order lifting that remand, even for compassionate reasons, raises serious questions about due process. His defense team flagged this too. What you also have here is parallel prosecution in two different courts at the same time, federal and state. This is unusual in scale and coordination. It signals that whoever is running this prosecution is determined to build a legal cage with no exit.
Now, we get to the part that Naijanewsfeed exists for. Because if you're watching this thinking this is just a clean anti-corruption story, I need you to think again. Let's start with the man himself. El-Rufai served as governor of Kaduna State from 2015 to 2023. Before that, he was Minister of the Federal Capital Territory under President Obasanjo, a tenure that itself was controversial, involving mass demolitions and urban renewal exercises that displaced thousands of Abuja residents. He has always been a polarizing figure, brilliant, combative, intellectually sharp, and deeply divisive. He was a founding figure of the APC, the ruling All Progressives Congress. He was one of the architects of the coalition that brought Buhari to power in 2015. He was considered one of the most influential political operators in northern Nigeria. And then he fell out with Tinubu. By 2023, El-Rufai had made his opposition to Bola Tinubu's presidential ambitions very clear. He did not hide it. He publicly questioned whether Tinubu was the right candidate. When Tinubu won the APC primary and then the presidency, El-Rufai found himself politically isolated. He eventually left the APC and joined the Social Democratic Party, the SDP, becoming one of the most prominent opposition voices in the country. He has since been a loud critic of the Tinubu administration. He's called out economic policies, he's spoken about insecurity. He's been present at opposition gatherings and discussions about coalition building ahead of 2027. And then, in February 2026, about 18 months into Tinubu's presidency and about 18 months before the 2027 elections, the ICPC comes for him. Now, let me be precise here. I am not saying the charges are false. Some of the allegations are very specific. The 11 billion naira allegedly paid to an unregistered company, Kaduna MRTSJV Nigeria Limited, for a light rail project that was never built. That's either true or it isn't, and courts will decide. The alleged 4.61 billion naira CCTV contract to a connected company, the alleged inflation of severance pay from a legal maximum of roughly 20 million naira per term to 289.8 million naira per term. These are specific, documentable claims. But the timing is political. You don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to see that. The Kaduna State House of Assembly had already indicted El-Rufai in 2024 under the current governor Uba Sani, who is an APC man and notably a former close ally and protege of El-Rufai himself, who has since aligned firmly with the Tinubu camp. That assembly investigation gave the federal agencies the political cover to move. Who benefits from El-Rufai being locked up heading into 2027? The Tinubu camp benefits. El-Rufai is one of the few opposition voices with national credibility, northern roots, and a proven ability to frame a political argument. Removing him from the conversation, either by keeping him in custody or by drowning him in legal proceedings, neutralizes a serious threat. Who else benefits? Governor Uba Sani. Governor Uba Sani made El-Rufai's political career. But political sons have a long history in Nigeria of distancing themselves, or worse, from political fathers when the winds change. Sani is now in Tinubu's corner. El-Rufai in prison doesn't hurt Sani one bit. What about the silent players? There are interests in Kaduna.
business interests, land interests, contract interests, who would prefer that El-Rufai's tenure not be examined too closely because the exposure of his deals might expose their own. The CCTV contracts, the land fraud allegations, the rail project, these involve private companies and private individuals. Some of those people have reasons to cooperate with prosecutors, some have reasons to stay very quiet. Then there is the DSS dimension. The separate case involving DSS is reportedly connected to allegations that El-Rufai and his son, Bashir, who is described as currently at large, attempted to bribe federal investigators in Dubai and Cairo in October 2025. That's an extraordinary allegation. If true, it means the prosecution has evidence that El-Rufai was attempting to interfere with the investigation into himself while still a free man. If this allegation lands in court and is proven, his chances of bail collapse entirely. El-Rufai's lawyers have confirmed there's yet another case coming, April 10th at the Federal High Court in Abuja. That case is specifically the DSS matter. His own lawyers described it by saying, "We have filed all necessary processes and will be in court." What does the DSS want with a former governor? We will come back to this. Here's something almost nobody is talking about. El-Rufai's former co-defendant in the Abuja bribery allegations, his son Bashir, is reportedly at large. That means Nigeria's security apparatus with DSS, ICPC and police all circling El-Rufai Sr. has apparently not been able to locate or detain his son. It either means the son has fled the country or someone powerful enough doesn't want the son caught yet. Either way, that silence is telling. Let's zoom out. What does this case mean for Nigeria? First, federalism and the power of the center. Nigeria runs a federal system on paper, but what's happening in Kaduna right now is a demonstration of how when the federal government decides it wants to come after a state-level politician, the machinery is overwhelming. Federal courts, federal anti-corruption agencies, federal secret service, the state-level political establishment aligned with the center. A former governor, regardless of how powerful he was, is essentially defenseless when the full weight of federal power turns against him. This sends a message to every sitting governor in Nigeria: stay in line, because when your time is up, if you're not in good standing with Abuja, everything from your severance pay to your CCTV contract can become a criminal charge. Second, the credibility of anti-corruption in Nigeria. This is the tension at the heart of the story. Nigeria desperately needs its corruption prosecuted. The allegations against El-Rufai, if proven, represent staggering abuse: 11 billion naira to a non-existent company, 4.61 billion naira CCTV deal to a connected company, a World Bank loan allegedly diverted. These are serious allegations. Ordinary Kaduna residents who experienced collapsed infrastructure, delayed salaries for teachers and healthcare workers, they deserve justice if public funds were stolen. But when anti-corruption is wielded selectively, when it tracks political loyalty rather than evidence, it destroys public trust in institutions, and Nigeria is already running very low on that trust. If El-Rufai supporters believe this is persecution and Tinubu supporters believe it's justice, nobody is looking at the actual facts. That's dangerous. The implications for 2027. This case will not be resolved before the 2027 election campaigns begin in earnest. El-Rufai, locked in court battles, is essentially neutralized as a political actor. The opposition coalition that was forming around figures like him, Atiku, and Peter Obi loses one of its more strategically minded members. This shifts the balance of opposition politics and potentially makes a Tinubu second term significantly easier to engineer. The real question isn't whether El-Rufai is guilty. Courts will settle that. The real question is whether Nigerian institutions, courts, anti-corruption agencies are strong enough to be trusted by all sides, and right now, that answer depends entirely on who you ask. There is a genuine international dimension here, and it's worth spending a moment on it. The allegation that El-Rufai and his son allegedly met investigators in Dubai and Cairo, that's not a domestic affair. If those meetings happened, they happened on foreign soil, which means foreign intelligence services potentially have records. The UAE and Egypt both have intelligence sharing arrangements with Nigeria's DSS. This may be part of why DSS specifically is involved in the parallel case. There's also the World Bank dimension. One of the charges involves the alleged diversion of a World Bank loan granted to Kaduna State. World Bank money comes with conditions, transparency requirements, auditing frameworks. If a loan tied to donor conditions was diverted, it creates diplomatic ripple effects. It may affect Nigeria's access to future concessional lending. It may trigger a World Bank internal investigation. For Nigerians in the diaspora, particularly those in the UK and US following Nigerian politics, the key thing to understand is this. Western governments are watching Nigeria's 2027 cycle very carefully. The combination of high-profile anti-corruption cases that track opposition political figures, plus press access restrictions to court proceedings, plus DSS involvement, this is the kind of pattern that generates diplomatic concern. It doesn't necessarily generate sanctions, but it generates conversations behind closed doors. Nigeria's image as a democracy undergoing institutional development rather than backsliding depends on how cases like this are handled.
Now, let's deal with the pushback, because I promised you balance and that's what you're getting. Misconception 1. This is purely political persecution. This is the El-Rufai camp's preferred narrative. And yes, the timing is suspicious. Yes, the political context matters. But it does not follow that the charges are fabricated. 11 billion naira to an unregistered company is either documented or it isn't. A former governor receiving 579 million naira in severance when the legal ceiling was 40 million naira. That's not a political claim, that's either a bank record or it isn't. The political motive behind the prosecution doesn't automatically make the facts wrong. Both things can be true. The charges can be politically motivated and factually grounded. Nigerian citizens should demand that courts rule on the facts, not the politics. Misconception 2. El-Rufai is being persecuted for being in opposition. This argument ignores that El-Rufai had years of warning. Reports of financial irregularities during his tenure circulated long before 2026. The Kaduna State Assembly indictment came in 2024. If the EFCC or ICPC had evidence, the clock was ticking regardless of his political alignment. Timing is suspicious, but suspicious is not the same as fabricated. Misconception 3. The ICPC is doing its job. This has nothing to do with Tinubu. The strongest version of this argument is that the ICPC is an independent institution pursuing credible allegations. That's theoretically correct, but in practice, institutional independence in Nigeria is extremely fragile. The pattern of prosecution tracking political opposition is a pattern, not a one-time coincidence. The ICPC chairman, the DSS Director General, and the EFCC chair all serve at the pleasure of the presidency in various ways. Structural independence doesn't automatically produce actual independence. These are not cynical observations, they are structural realities of the Nigerian system. What actually matters for Nigeria's long-term stability? An independent judiciary that rules on facts, not politics. A prosecution process that is applied equally regardless of which party a former official belongs to. And a press with full access to court proceedings, not armed operatives barring journalists from the courtroom. The restriction of press access in a corruption trial of this magnitude is not a small thing. Transparency is not optional in a healthy democracy. Here's your forecast. Here's what to watch for. April 10, 2026, Federal High Court, Abuja. This is the DSS matter. El-Rufai's lawyers have confirmed they will be in court. This is the bribery of investigators case. If evidence is presented publicly, it could fundamentally alter public perception of El-Rufai. Watch this date closely. April 14, 2026, Federal High Court, Kaduna. Bail ruling. Justice Aikawa will either grant bail or deny bail. If bail is denied, El-Rufai goes back into ICPC custody. His lawyers will almost certainly appeal. If bail is granted, he walks free pending trial, which changes the political dynamic entirely. A free El-Rufai is a much more effective opposition figure than a detained one. What signals an escalation?
If bail is denied and no appeal succeeds before mid-2026, expect El-Rufai's political allies to intensify their rhetoric about judicial independence. If the DSS case in Abuja introduces new evidence of international bribery networks, expect the prosecution to push for pre-trial detention indefinitely. If El-Rufai is granted bail and immediately resumes political activity, expect the Tinubu camp to accelerate the trial timeline. Best-case scenario, bail is granted, trial proceeds at a reasonable pace, evidence is tested in open court, and a verdict is reached within 12 to 18 months. Nigeria gets a precedent that powerful governors can be held accountable through proper legal process. Worst-case scenario, El-Rufai remains in detention through 2027. He becomes a political martyr figure, galvanizing sympathy that his prosecution might not deserve, generating a narrative of persecution that overshadows the actual evidence and poisoning public trust in anti-corruption efforts for a generation. The long-term impact if nothing changes: a political culture where anti-graft agencies serve as instruments of political warfare rather than institutions of justice means no governor, no minister, no public official will ever feel secure operating honestly. Because if honesty doesn't protect you from prosecution when the winds change, why bother being honest? We opened with a question. I asked why it took Nigeria over 3 years after El-Rufai left office to get him into a courtroom and who the real target is. Here's my answer. The real target is always power. The case against El-Rufai may have merit. The specific figures, the specific contracts, the specific transactions are either real or fabricated, and courts will eventually tell us which is which. But the prosecution is about power. It's about who controls the political landscape heading into 2027. It's about whether the opposition in Nigeria can field credible, experienced candidates or whether those candidates will be managing legal battles instead of campaign rallies. El-Rufai is not a saint. His record as governor is genuinely contested. But in a country that claims to want accountability, accountability must apply equally or it means nothing. The man deserves a fair trial. Nigeria deserves a fair process, and we all deserve to know the truth about what happened to public money in Kaduna State between 2015 and 2023. April 14th is 2 weeks away. Keep watching this space and tell me in the comments, do you think El-Rufai gets bail? And do you think this case is about justice, politics, or both? If this breakdown gave you clarity on what's really going on, do me a favor. Share it with one person who needs to understand this. Like the video, subscribe to Naijanewsfeed, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay sharp.